Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 706 for June 14th, 2018. Coming up in a few minutes.
We do about a quarter of our sales overseas. So to lose that market because the day it lands at the dock, it goes up by 25%, the compounding cost of that is going to go up greatly.
And your whiskey was already expensive over there.
It was, and we were already in the way. The funny part was we were already trying to drop it anyway. We've been working with our suppliers and our wholesalers to actually bring that cost down. This is just going to be a kick in the teeth.
For Adam Spiegel of the Sonoma County Distilling Company, the trade war between the U.S. and some of its key trading partners is a double whammy. Not only will the new tariffs on U.S. whiskey exports to the European Union, Canada, and Mexico cut into his export sales, but those tariffs were in retaliation for U.S. tariffs imposed on imported steel and aluminum. And Spiegel is right in the middle of expanding his distillery in California. We'll take a look at the impact of the trade war on U.S. distillers on WhiskyCast In-Depth. That's coming up later on, along with the calendar of events, your voice, behind the label, and the What I'm Tasting This Week department, all just ahead on this edition of WhiskyCast.
This is whiskey, Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey, from this place and these people, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
Let's start with the latest news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. Brown-Forman officially opened the doors today to its new Old Forester Distillery on Louisville's Main Street downtown, which has also been known for many years as Whiskey Row because of Main Street's place in bourbon history. In fact, the historic buildings at 117 and 119 Main Street that are now Old Forester's new home once housed Brown-Forman's headquarters before Prohibition. The $45 million project is opening about a year behind schedule because of a fire next door in 2015 that slowed down the renovation project. It's not only a tourist attraction, but a complete distillery that will also have its own on-site cooperage, produce 100,000 proof gallons of whiskey each year, and mature 900 barrels on site at any one time. Brown-Forman Master Distiller Chris Morris has already started filling the warehouse with the first few barrels of White Dog.
The Old Forester Distillery will be an exciting addition to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, of which we like to think Wood Reserve is certainly one of the founding members of, and it's going to be a great asset to downtown Louisville, and it will showcase the width and breadth of Brown-Forman's whiskey-making credentials, with Woodford Reserve being, as you well know, an iconic, classic, historic rural distillery. The distillery set out in this bucolic Woodford Reserve environment, and Old Forester will be the other side of the page. It'll show the historic urban distilling style. So come to Brown-Forman and see both historic styles of whiskey making, Woodford Reserve and Old Forester.
It'll be a few years before the whiskey being distilled at Old Forester will be ready for bottling, but the distillery will also be one of the few places to get the revival of Old Forester President's Choice. Between 1964 and his death in 1969, the late George Garvin Brown personally selected single barrels of Old Forester to be bottled under the President's Choice label, which was only sold by the barrel to VIP customers. Now his grandson, Old Forester President Campbell Brown, will be picking barrels of 8-year-old bourbon to be bottled at between 55 and 60% ABV. They'll be available for around $90 each at the distillery and a handful of Kentucky retailers. Meanwhile, there's another generational change today along the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. Bardstown's Willett Distillery has promoted Britt Colsveen to president and chief whiskey officer. She takes over for her mother, Martha, and is the great-granddaughter of the distillery's founder, A. Lambert Willett. Her brother, Drew, remains Willett's master distiller. The announcement was made in a ceremony at Louisville's Fraser History Museum, also along Whiskey Row. And just down the block from where Michter's is working on its new downtown distillery in another historic building across the street from the Louisville Slugger Museum. It's a project we've been talking about for several years now, but Michter's president Joe Magliocco says the work is almost complete.
We're hoping to be open later this year. Late September, early October. I mean, things have always slipped a little bit from time to time, but we're really towards the end of stuff. Our equipment's in there. We have the Pennsylvania Michter's 2 pot still system in there. We have the Cypress wood fermenters in there. Fits like a glove in the building. It's like it was made for that building. Fort Nelson's turning out really beautiful. It's a great old landmark building, and we're pretty excited about it. It'll be nice to have a home open to the public.
You're not going to make it in time for Bourbon Festival, though, right?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that's unlikely, quite honestly. I mean, we want to kind of have things operating right when we open up. So, but it won't be long afterwards, though.
It's been a long time coming for you. Are you happy to see this almost done?
Yeah, no, I'm really happy to see this almost done. I mean, the building was a much bigger project than we anticipated. When we went to buy, we actually had 400,000 pounds of steel that we had to buy and put in there to reinforce the building. It was quite a big job, much more than we expected. The brick was bowing 22 inches out of place at the top of the West 8th Street side. But the good news, we were able to save this beautiful old building. So we're really excited. It's going to be really, really sharp. We're going to have some great educational tours there, and it should be pretty interesting. I mean, there's so much good stuff going on now in downtown Louisville. There are other great distilleries opening right near us. We're in the same block as the Fraser Museum, which would be one of the gateways to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. So we feel very lucky to be part of that community.
We'll have more details on an opening date as soon as it's announced. Of course, Louisville is not the only city where there's work going on new distilleries. Baltimore's first new distillery since Prohibition, the Baltimore Whiskey Company, is getting ready to move into its new home. Co-founder Max Lentz told us the makers of Epic Rye have outgrown their original site after just 2.5 years.
We are full to the brim, to the ceiling and out of room. So we're moving into a new multi-manufacturer space called the Union Collective. There'll be a brewery in there, a hot sauce manufacturer, a coffee roastery, an ice creamery, kind of focused on urban manufacturing. But we're taking about 4 times as much space as we have now, getting a second still that's 4 times as big as our current pot still, but another 1-pass pot still. So we'll have our stripping still and a spirit still finally, which is really exciting. More fermentation, bigger mash, better tasting area, and in general, just a lot of quality of life improvements.
They're also producing gin and brandies, as well as the Epic Rye, which has been selling out at the distillery about as fast as they can bottle it. You'll find my tasting notes for it at whiskycast.com. In Scotland, Chivas Brothers has broken ground on the expansion of its Kilmallock campus in Dumbarton with a new bottling hall. The project is budgeted at £50 million, around $66.4 million, and is part of Pernod Ricard's overall plans to consolidate Chivas Brothers' operations at Kilmallock while phasing out its facilities in Paisley. An executive move of note, Glenmorangie Company CEO Mark Hellinger is moving back to Moet Hennessy headquarters in France. He'll become international director for Dom Perignon and Moet et Chandon champagnes. Thomas Moradpour will move to Edinburgh to take over for Hellinger. He's currently the international marketing director for Hennessy Cognac. That move is effective August 15th. In other executive suite news, there was one whiskey-related honor on Queen Elizabeth's birthday honors list released the other day. Bushmills executive chairman David Gosnell was awarded an OBE, or Officer of the British Empire, for his services to Northern Ireland's whiskey industry. He's been running Bushmills since Diageo bought the distillery from Pernod Ricard back in 2005 and stayed on after it was sold to Casa Cuervo in 2014. Turning now to new whiskeys, and with Father's Day coming up this weekend, it seems appropriate to start with Wild Turkey's newest bourbon. Master's Keep Revival comes from Eddie Russell, who took the inspiration for it from one of the bourbons his father Jimmy created about 15 years ago, Wild Turkey Sherry Signature, and Eddie put his own spin on it. But that inspiration actually came from Eddie's son Bruce Russell, who's on the path to follow in his and Jimmy's footsteps.
My son sort of got my interest peaked a few years ago when I had a few bottles of the Sherry Signature Jimmy did back in the early 2000s. So I decided to bring it back. I wanted to make sure I used some older whiskey, which, that I like a little better than Jimmy. I want to use old cask. That was the hardest part was, finding old cask. It seems like they've all been bought up over in Spain, but I did run into one guy in Juarez that had a few left that I got from him. The Sherry Signature that Jimmy did was actually enhanced with a low-slow sherry, and I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to do a finish. So this is just a finish with 12 to 15-year-old bourbon.
Is this the first time Bruce has inspired one of your products?
Yeah, I like to get his opinion on just about everything because he's just in that group of people that we sort of, market to a lot anymore. But I'll definitely like to get his ideas on what he's thinking on most things. Not quite like Jimmy did with me, but, it's just a different consumer nowadays.
And Bruce is still learning too, right?
Yeah, Bruce he's got a long way to go as far as making whiskey and things like that. But, he's in that on-premise scene a lot, and he talks to a lot of bartenders and younger people, which is, a lot of these things I do. I do a lot of stuff for our normal consumer, the older whiskeys, the barrel proofs, non-chill filter stuff, but things like this is, not only hitting towards the collectors, but that younger generation.
The Oloroso sherry casks Eddie Russell used for Wild Turkey Master's Keep Revival were used for 20 years in Spain before they were shipped to Kentucky. Master's Keep Revival will be available in limited amounts for around $150 a bottle. One other note, Eddie also confirmed that a 2002 vintage edition of Russell's Reserve will be coming out next month. That one should also be interesting. Meanwhile, Jim Beam is releasing the second batch of Booker's for 2018. This one is nicknamed Backyard Barbecue as a tribute to Booker No's legendary cookouts at his home in Bardstown. It's bottled at 64.4% ABV and will be available in the U.S. for around $70 a bottle. Nika from the Barrel is a big seller in many export markets, but it's never been available in the U.S. until now. Hodling & Company is Nika's U.S. importer, and Maurice Chevalier IV oversees Nika sales in the U.S. I caught up with him at Bar Convent, Brooklyn this week.
The delay was really trying to get it into a 750. That was really the main process of the delay in getting it here. But it's here. I'm a proud papa. Got it in my hands right here, a little block of whiskey, and everyone's happy. It's been the star of the show.
Now, you mentioned getting it into 750. The big problem was that it was always bottled in Japan in 500 mLs, which we can't sell in the U.S.
Correct. And imagine my dismay, it's everywhere in Europe. And coming home knowing that unless I get it at duty free, I'm not going to get it unless I go back to Europe or some other place to get it at duty free. So.
And this is a blend, isn't it?
It is a blend. It's a blend of malt and grain. They're married together and rested for about 3 to 6 months because they're at a higher proof. We're at 51.4%. So a lot higher, a lot bigger. But in the process, you've got probably one of the more fullest expressions of Nika out on the market today. It is my favorite of all my favorite Nika children.
When are we going to see more Nika in the U.S. market? Because obviously there was a problem with supply a few years ago. They had to get rid of all the age statement whiskeys. Any word from Nika on when that might change?
No, I think right now with the introduction of From the Barrel, this is going to be our new star for the next year or so, and we'll await word from Nika on when that any more expressions are coming. So bear that in mind. We've got From the Barrel, we've got the Nika coffee grain, coffee malt, the Taketsuru pure malt. Limited supply of the Taketsuru 17 and 21, but we do still have that available. It's more of a rare commodity now. And also the amazing Nika Gin and Nika Vodka. So we've got a full lineup now in the States of the true expression of Nika and what they bring to the table. We're very excited.
Nika from the Barrel bottles are in the distribution pipeline as of this week and should start to show up at retailers later this month. No word yet on pricing. Also from Japan, the online retailer Decanta is releasing its first private label bottling. The Key series will debut with a 2011 Aigashima Kiku finished in a Port Ellen single malt cask. Only 300 bottles will be available. The price tag, $650 each. Diageo is releasing a new limited edition version of Johnnie Walker Black Label in the travel retail market. Black Label Triple Cask Edition is blended with malts from Cardew, Strathmill, and Blair Athol that were matured in Caribbean rum, bourbon, and Scotch casks. Only 10,000 bottles will be available through Dufry's travel retail outlets, which does include the World Duty Free World of Whiskies shops located at most UK airports. It'll be priced at £28, around $37, for a 1-liter bottle. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. Are you still looking for that last-minute Father's Day gift? Trust me, Dad will be really happy with a bottle of Highland Park 18-year-old or any of the other Highland Park single malts. Check out the entire range at a whiskey shop near you or at highlandparkwhiskey.com. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. Headquarters Restaurant in Cape Town, South Africa will host a South African whiskey dinner on Wednesday night, June 20th, while Whiskey Live Durban runs from June 21st through the 23rd. The Whiskey Lounge's series of Fagile tastings around the UK kicks off on the 22nd in Newcastle and on the 23rd in London. Chambers Bay Distillery in Tacoma, Washington will host its 3rd anniversary party on the 23rd. That same night is Whiskey Freedom 2018 in Perth, Australia. The Flatiron Rim in New York City has a whiskey and cheese pairing class June 30th. And Buffalo Trace Distillery hosts the Great Buffalo Chase 5K Run on July 4th in Frankfort, Kentucky. Those are just a few of the 231 different events that are on our searchable calendar right now at whiskycast.com. If you have a tasting, festival, or other whiskey-related event coming up, just use the contact form on our website to add it to the list.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. At the beginning of this month, the United States imposed punitive tariffs on imported steel and aluminum from the European Union, Canada, and Mexico, after talks aimed at exempting those key U.S. trading partners from the same tariffs imposed on China, Japan, and other countries fell through. The Trump administration's stated goal was to preserve national security by protecting U.S. steelmakers from competition from cheaper imported steel and aluminum, and the administration used an obscure law passed during the Cold War era to justify its decision. Canada, the EU, and Mexico responded with their own retaliatory tariffs that are scheduled to take effect on July 1st, targeting a much wider range of American-made export products, including all American-made whiskeys. The U.S. has threatened to retaliate for those retaliatory tariffs, and while the administration has not yet announced what imports could be targeted, there is a good chance that whiskeys could be on the list if the U.S. goes after similar products. Now, for many years, whiskey industry leaders have been fighting to open up international markets and reduce or eliminate tariffs. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, eliminated tariffs on spirits traded between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, while the Free Trade Agreement in place between the U.S. and the European Union did the same thing. That is, until the trade war started, and America's trading partners exercised their right to retaliate for the U.S. tariffs. The trade war was a big topic of conversation during this week's New York Independent Spirits Expo and Bar Convent, Brooklyn. Margie Lehrman is the executive director of the American Craft Spirits Association.
Anytime, and I mean anytime that we have constraints on market access is a big deal for us. And this is just one more instance of inability to move product because of yet another restraint of some sort. So we are concerned. At the same time I say that, I know we're making strides in some areas, but this certainly has our attention and something that we'll be monitoring.
Do you have any recourse at all? Is there anything that can be done? Is there any influence that can be done in Washington to try to fix this?
We are in Washington right now, of course, meeting with different congressional offices. We also are looking at meeting with some trade reps actually within the administration to make sure that they understand the overall impact on a burgeoning industry that is reliant on this market access.
The ACSA represents small-scale distillers. Many of them don't sell their products across state lines, let alone national borders. But until now, a few craft distillers have found some success in the export business. One of those few, Paul Hutko of Few Spirits. Exports account for between 15 and 25% of his annual sales.
I think this tariff nonsense is just kind of that exactly. This tariff nonsense is nonsense. We are just innocent little bystanders in a game being played way above our pay grade. Just looking at Few Spirits alone, just as the stat I've been rattling off a lot is that Few exports 0.5% of U.S. spirits exports to China, and we expect that to evaporate. You could measure our exports on the league tables, and it's going to be all gone. We've already been suffering into Europe. Post-Brexit, we lost a lot of our volume based on the currency devaluation, adding on the additional 25% tariff. Our stuff's just all of a sudden going to get unaffordably expensive. And we're going to see a lot of our volume drop, and that hurts all Americans, not just us, because it hurts our farmers, it hurts our truck drivers that are moving the grain, it hurts our truck drivers that are moving the bottles. It hurts all of us. And I think it's really, really unfortunate that small American businesses are being toyed with in this fashion, but there's not much I can do about it either.
Remember at the beginning of this year when craft distillers were cheering the new tax reform law and a 2-year cut in the federal excise tax on distilled spirits? That cut was targeted to benefit craft distillers especially, and many decided to reinvest the savings in new equipment to expand their production, including Adam Spiegel of the Sonoma County Distilling Company in California.
The good news is we're expanding. We are going into a building that's much larger than we're at today. Currently we're at about 6,000 square feet. We'll be at 21,000 square feet by the end of the year, which means I have more room to store barrels, which means I also have more room to expand my production. We expect that in this new facility we should be able to expand our productions 4 or 5 times what we do today, which is really great.
Now, the bad news. Like Paul Hutko, about a quarter of Adam Spiegel's sales come from overseas, mainly in Europe, and he expects the export tariffs to take a bite out of that business. That's not all of the bad news, though. Guess what's used to make a lot of the equipment for that distillery expansion project? Steel and aluminum.
I'm also getting doubly screwed because I have a bunch of new stainless steel tanks that are on the way here that I just so happened to purchase apparently at the wrong time. So between all these things at the same time, it's hard for small business.
Tell me about that now. You ordered your tanks pre-tariff, and all of a sudden your cost went up by 25%, I assume?
So they did. Yeah, what we're finding right now is everybody's just kind of on hold. They're saying, listen, all of our pricing was good up until a certain point. We're going to have to see what happens when it lands. Like we'll know what tariffs are assessed the day it lands. The part that's unfortunate for us is that like the steel may come from overseas, but the welders are here in the States. So the welders are here in the States actually putting together all the bits and pieces for it. So they may have rolled it 4,000, 5,000 miles away, but we're actually hurting American jobs by what they're doing. So it's really unfortunate. I mean, I don't agree with a lot of what the administration does, but now this is actually hurting my bottom line. And, as a small business that's looking to get some traction here, I think it's really unfortunate.
And you're not the only distiller in this situation, right?
Oh, certainly not. I mean, when I go overseas to Whiskey Live Paris or the Whiskey Exchange show, I see a lot of craft distillers, and all of them are affected by it. Unfortunately, we expect that the sales of our products will just go down as a result of it. We've been seeing some great momentum, especially in the UK, and there's not much more we can do. I mean, we go out there, I pound the pavement, I work really hard, and unfortunately, right now, things are going to be tough.
This really comes at a time when American whiskeys were becoming really popular in Europe, as we discussed last October at the Whiskey Exchange show in London. And this comes at just the wrong time for you, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And the big guys are actually found this as a really good opportunity to use their warehouses overseas. So what I've heard is that they've stockpiled up a whole year's worth of supply. They've got it sitting over there right now, pre-tariff. So they can continue to sell at the existing price point and maybe reassess next year. So right now I'm a little nervous about that because that means that they can stay where they're at and our prices are going to go up because we are certainly not in the same position.
Last week, Brown-Forman incoming CEO Lawson Whiting confirmed during a conference call with stock analysts that his company did start preparing for possible tariffs earlier this year by front-loading shipments of Jack Daniel's and Woodford Reserve to key markets.
Markets where we own our own route to market, which would be most of Europe, most of the big markets in Europe, we have a lot more flexibility and control over the situation. In markets where we use third-party distributors, it's a little bit more difficult.
This is going to make it difficult, and ultimately we hope that the people of the UK who've been buying our product, and the people of Europe in general, France and Germany and Italy, will continue to support us because all we can do is just continue to make our products. We're already trying to do everything we can to squeeze our prices to make them more effective and more competitive. And at the end of the day, I hope that we can kind of come to some sort of resolution on a global scale because all of this is hurting everybody across the board. No one's not feeling this right now.
How much did this expand or increase your construction costs for the distillery expansion?
We've been telling people that right now we're expecting somewhere between $50,000 to $60,000 more in costs and just stainless steel alone. So it hurts. It hurts a lot. That's two employees, maybe an employee and a half worth of wages. That's unfortunate. The reality is the cost of doing business. We've tried to factor into our business plan. And we're going to continue to grow our business at the right tilt. Unfortunately, or fortunately for us, whiskey's a really long game. So ideally, in a perfect world, we're going to take that whiskey, we're going to lock it into a barrel, and we're going to let that thing sit. And if it's the environment's not ready in 3 or 4 years to receive it, well, maybe let it sit there 5, 6 years. So we're just going to have to figure it out from there.
It almost seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the deal that distillers were given with the federal excise tax changes in the Tax Reform Act, they gave you a benefit on one hand, and then they took it away with the other with the tariffs.
Well, and the worst part is, and this is the part that I'm actually really appreciating you bringing up, is that the tax break actually expires. So we actually could very well find ourselves in a position in which we don't have that tax break any longer, and there's a tariff on both importing steel as well as bringing our whiskey out of market. So it could really be bad for us on a triple threat there. That tax break, that excise tax break we received is due to expire in T-minus a year. So that's scary.
The old parable goes, what one hand gives, the other takes away. There's also another one, something about the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing.
If you look at what Congress is doing versus what the administration is doing, they don't necessarily go hand in glove, do they? We know that we've heard from several of the congressmen, and with over 300 in the House supportive of the FET and about 55 in the Senate, we know we have the support on the reduction. We're still not even taking that as a given because, as you know, that sunsets in December 2019. So we're still working with that. We will also be meeting with those supporters, though, as well, and making sure that they are reminded that exactly what you said, that the FET reduction has made a difference. Don't allow this other thing to last long.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell comes from Kentucky, and his home state will be one of those most affected by the tariffs on bourbon and American whiskey exports. While he has criticized the Trump administration's decision to impose the tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, this week he shot down a move led by Tennessee Senator Bob Corker aimed at blocking those tariffs. We'll keep you updated on the status of the trade conflict as it affects the whiskey industry. And that's WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay single malt. Look for the classic 16-year-old Lagavulin, the Distillers Edition, and the throwback 8-year-old Lagavulin at a whiskey shop near you. Find out more at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. A few weeks ago, we mentioned some of the changes in Jura's range of single malts from White & Mackay. One of the new Jura releases is Seven Wood, a no-age statement single malt that starts out in ex-bourbon casks, but then is finished in a combination of 6 different types of French oak casks. Not wine casks, though. These are virgin oak casks that have never been used before. Jura's Seven Wood is bottled at 42% ABV. The nose is fruity and aromatic with notes of peaches, orange peel, oak sawdust, honey, and just a hint of pipe tobacco smoke. The taste is buttery smooth with good fruity notes of peaches, orange peel, a hint of red apples, subtle spices, honey, and a soft oakiness. The finish is nice and long with dried fruits and a hint of pipe tobacco smoke. I'm scoring the Jura 7 Wood a 91. Now, by way of comparison, the Jura 18-year-old spent its entire lifetime in first fill ex-bourbon casks before a brief finishing period in French oak red wine barriques. It's bottled at 44% ABV. The nose has hints of smoke, toffee, and hints of red grapes and oak tannins. The taste is nutty with pecan pie, caramel, spicy touches of clove and cardamom, dark chocolate, and oak. The finish is long and oaky with touches of baking chocolate and honey. I'm scoring the Jura 18-year-old a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, our tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, where they're making room in the trophy case after the recent San Francisco World Spirits Competition. Best bourbon, Henry McKenna Single Barrel. The best small batch bourbon, Elijah Craig Small Batch. Just more proof of Heaven Hill's pedigree for making whiskeys with award-winning flavor. Meet the family at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. Next up, Old Boltney's 2006 vintage was produced for the travel retail market. It's matured in first fill ex-bourbon casks and bottled at 46% ABV. The nose on my sample has hints of toffee, honey, and soft spices. The taste is full-bodied with notes of citrus, apples, honey, and toasted coconut, balanced out by gentle spices and hints of vanilla. The finish, long and fruity. I'm scoring the Old Pulteney 2006 vintage a 91. And last time around, we mentioned Cask 88's debut release in its Scottish Folklore series of independent bottlings, a 45-year-old Ben Nevis single cask bottling distilled back in 1972. It was matured in an ex-sherry hogshead and bottled at 43.2% ABV. The nose is aromatic and fruity, with notes of toffee, figs, plums, and molasses. The taste has dark fruits, baking chocolate, clove, a touch of pipe tobacco, and hints of licorice and black cherries. The finish is nice and long, with that same note of black cherries, along with pipe tobacco and touches of spices and oak. I'm scoring the Cask 88 Ben Nevis 45-year-old single malt Scotch a 92. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 2,200 different whiskeys at whiskycast.com.
This is whiskey. Johnny Walker's Scotch whiskey. From this place, and these places in that place. These are the people that make it. This is what they sound like.
Because you're a cheeky wee blighter.
Dance like. Aye, like that. This is what they do all day. Building the great character of Johnny Walker Black Label. Aging in oak for 12 long years.
Thanks. Oh, it's gorgeous there.
What is character? It's giving a damn.
You're alright, lassie.
Which looks like this, as much as this. See, the land that shapes these people and the people that shape this whiskey all shape how bloody good it tastes.
Put the bloody game on the telly, Ella.
A whiskey as bold as it is complex. For every step you take, this is Johnny Walker Black Label, friends. Step right up.
Cut. Can I drink this now?
Johnny Walker Black Label Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Lot 40. There was one new bourbon announced this week that I did not mention during the news. And you'll probably be able to figure out why when I tell you just what Tamworth Distilling flavored its Eau de Musk bourbon with. It's called Castoreum, and it's made from the oils extracted from a beaver's castor sacs that are located just below its tail. In the perfume world, it'd be called musk oil. But here, let's call it what it is: beaver butt crack juice. The one and only reason I mention it here is because @WhiskeyPete on Twitter posted this note. Can't tell which I'd least rather be stuck on a deserted island with, Eau de Musk or Fishkey, with a link to our tasting notes for that single cask Brook Laddie finished in a herring cask that we heard about from Klaus Pinkernell on the show last month during episode 696. And for what it's worth, I hope I am never in the position to have to make that choice. Okay, there's a second reason. Jeff Adams at Romer DC on Twitter reminded me of last month's Drams for Fams online tasting with the Scotch Test Dummies and Travis Watt of the Edmonton Scotch Club to raise money for local food banks around North America. Jeff's tweet, #Drams for Fams 2019, $1,500 goal mark? Along with a series of emojis ranging from a pondering face to one green from being sick. Now, Castoreum is apparently used as a flavoring in some foods, though I'll admit that I have never looked closely enough at ingredient lists to notice it. I will now, though. I got this email today from Lee Younger in Tennessee. I'm new to the podcast and YouTube channel, but I love it all. You're doing incredibly cool stuff on every outlet. My question is, have you ever told your whiskey story? We know you live in a regrettably dry town, but what else? How did WhiskyCast become a thing? Have you always been a journalist or researcher and you just decided to pursue your passion of whiskey? Or were you ever in the industry? How does one become a whiskey journalist that brands recognize and send samples to? Maybe you've already told your whiskey story before on the show. If so, let me know what episode. If not, I have a recording studio and host a couple of podcasts myself. I'd love to interview you. Maybe it could be an episode's WhiskyCast In-Depth sometime soon. with a wink emoji. Again, thanks, Mark. All of your content is interesting, informative, and superbly produced. Hope you keep going for a long time. Lee, thanks for your note and the kind words. We do plan to be going for a long time to come. I have never told the WhiskyCast origin story here on the show. I have told it as a guest on a few other podcasts, but for the record, I've been a broadcaster and a journalist for many, many, many years. My family does tell their side of the origin story on our website, though. The page is locked so that I can't edit it, but there's a link for it in our show notes at whiskycast.com. Now, if you have a question, a suggestion, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always post it on the Your Voice page at whiskycast.com. Or you can track us down on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Behind the Label is our inside look at some of the science, history, and other things that make whiskey unique. We've all heard for years that one of the basics of what legally defines a whiskey is that it has to be bottled at a minimum of 40% ABV, or 80 proof if you prefer that measurement. But if you have looked closely at the labels of a lot of these flavored whiskeys on the market, you'll see that many are bottled at below 40%. Let's take the recent example of George Dickel's Tabasco Barrel Finish, and not picking on Dickel here, but it's bottled at 35% ABV or 70 proof. So, what gives? Well, if you have ever read Title 27 of the United States Code of Federal Regulations, you're probably familiar with Chapter 1, Subchapter A, Part 5, Subpart C, Section 5.22. I recommend it, especially if you're suffering from insomnia. That section is known as the Standards of Identity for Distilled Spirits, and it defines each type of spirit in exhaustive detail. Class 2 deals with whiskey in all of its various forms, and that's where you find all the language about the 40% minimum ABV. But if you scroll down a bit deeper, all the way to Class 9, that's where you'll find a separate section covering flavored spirits, including brandy, gin, rum, vodka, and, yes, whiskey. That section allows the addition of natural flavorings and sugar, and allows for a minimum ABV of 30% or 60 proof. But it also requires the producer to include the name of the predominant flavor as part of the designation. Now, Class 8 deals with liqueurs, which are similar to these flavored whiskeys, except that the flavorings can't add up to more than 2.5% of the weight of the final product, but also allows for a minimum strength of 30% ABV. Now, I'll admit this one tripped me up for a long time. I was one of those people who used to complain about something being labeled as whiskey when it was bottled below 40% ABV, until someone, and I'll admit that I forget who it was, pointed me to those sections of the rules. And, by the way, there is a similar loophole in European law, which allows flavored whiskeys to be labeled as a spirit drink and carry a minimum strength of 15% ABV. If you have something you'd like us to look at on Behind the Label, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Finally, Father's Day is coming up this weekend, and I know from my own personal experience that dads are the source of some of the worst jokes ever told. #DadJoke. The folks at Tomatin did a survey to find what they referred to as the most grown-tastic dad gags, and they got comedian Fred McCauley to deliver the winners, or the losers, as the case may be.
These are the best worst dad jokes as voted for by you. shall we? Number 3, did you hear about the magic tractor? Turned into a field. Fair enough. That was the reaction I was expecting. Number 2 of the best, worst dad gags. Here it comes. A dad is washing his car with his son. And the son shouts, "Daddy, can you not use a sponge instead?" And finally, the number 1 gag. What did the buffalo say when his son left? "Bye, son." Thanks very much. I've been Fred McCauley, and all that remains is for me to say, have a happy Father's Day. Good gags, what do they go with? A good dram.
Thanks to Fred McCauley and Tomatin for helping us to end this episode on a lighter note. C flat. Sorry, couldn't resist my own dad joke there. Jokes are the one thing you will not find, though, at whiskycast.com, but you will find links for our WhiskyCast HD videos and the WhiskyCast Virtual Tastings podcast presented by the Whiskey Exchange, along with the latest whiskey news, events, tasting notes, and much more, including a complete archive of past episodes. Our cask strength conversation continues all week long online. You'll find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
This is Whiskey, Johnny Walker's Scotch whisky, from this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2018, and comes to you twice each week from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.